Last night, I found out my husband, Adrian, was the one holding $8 billion worth of shares in my family's corporation. A number big enough to shift the entire structure of my family, and big enough to leave me frozen in front of my own husband's safe. The bitter part is the moment I discovered it happened to be the exact moment my dad said something I never thought he'd dare say in his life. That guy's just a freeloader living off my daughter. He said it while drinking. Said it right next to me. Said it with a tone so dismissive you'd think Adrian was nothing more than extra furniture in the house. And me, I just stood there, my hands still shaking after opening the safe Adrian always kept locked. Inside was a stack of documents proving he owned more shares than even my brother could dream of touching. That moment felt like two blades dropping at the same time. One from my family. One from the truth Adrian had been hiding. But to understand how I ended up in such a twisted situation, we have to go back a few years, back when I still believed I was walking into a normal marriage. I'm Taryn, the youngest daughter of the chairman of a major tech corporation. I grew up in a world where every breath was tied to the company. Meetings, deals, partners, shares, power. I was used to stability, but I also knew that stability always came with a price. And Adrian? He came from a middle-class background. Not poor, but definitely not part of my world. He worked as a financial analyst at an investment firm. He was quiet, reserved, never said anything unnecessary. He had a kind of calm that made people naturally keep their distance. The day I brought Adrian home to meet my family, everyone looked at him with polite but cold eyes. I saw it right away. To them, it wasn't enough. And because Adrian always kept a bit of distance, they believed it even more. My mom said he wasn't proactive. My sister went straight to the point. He seems fine, but he doesn't fit our family. And my dad, he treated Adrian like an inexperienced employee who got lucky enough to marry his daughter. But I chose Adrian for a simple reason. I felt at peace when I was next to him. No showing off, no need to prove anything. With him, I could just be myself. And I thought that was enough to start a marriage. We got married pretty fast. Adrian never touched my family's assets. He never asked about the company. He didn't try to get involved in those power-heavy conversations my dad loved so much. That staying on the sidelines made my family look down on him even more. And Adrian accepted it. Or at least, that's what I thought. The first years of our marriage were simple. He went to work, came home, cooked with me, asked about the pressure I faced at my dad's company. He never commented on my family's decisions, even though I sometimes knew he understood them better than people within the company. But there was always something odd. He avoided every company-related gathering. He never talked about investments, even though that was his entire field. And whenever my family discussed internal matters in front of him, he stayed quiet like he was behind an invisible wall. I used to think it was humility. Now I know it was self-protection. But until last night, I still believed Adrian was just a normal man. Someone who chose a simple life. Someone who didn't want to get pulled into the complicated world of my family. That night, the whole family gathered for dinner. It was a dinner I didn't even want to attend, but my dad said he had updates about a new project. Adrian came late because of a meeting. And maybe because he was tired and already annoyed by my family's attitude, he stayed quiet almost the entire time. That's when my dad dropped the final blow. He's only able to live here because of you. On his own, he has no future. No one reacted. My sister even chimed in with a casual, "A man without ambition is hard to talk to." I looked at Adrian. He didn't frown, didn't get angry. He just pressed the tip of his finger against the chair arm, like he was holding something back. That night when we got home, he went straight to his office, and I, for reasons I still can't fully explain, walked to his safe. Part curiosity, part hurt, part wanting to understand why he stayed so silent after being insulted that blatantly. And then I managed to open it. A thick stack of documents, share transfer papers, investment funds under unfamiliar names, and finally, the number $8.02 billion tied to Adrian's name. I stood there so long I could hear my own heartbeat. Every piece of the puzzle suddenly lit up in my head. His silence, his distance, how he never joined any conversations about the company. Those vague business trips, the way he never needed my family to treat him well. None of it was humility. It was the truth he chose to hide. And just as I was standing there, hands shaking while holding that stack of documents, I heard my dad's voice downstairs again, still the same old contempt. He has no future. Taryn will have to carry him her whole life. That sentence hit me in a way I didn't expect. Not just because it insulted my husband, but because now I knew. The truth was the complete opposite. I didn't say anything that night. I just went to the kitchen for some water, watching my family talk while my chest felt heavy. I looked at Adrian from afar. He stood still, quiet, calm, just like always. But in that moment, something in me started to shift. A small, sharp question formed. If Adrian was never beneath them the way they thought, then all these years, who was the one failing to see the truth? From that night on, things between me and my family slowly changed. No noise, no explosions. Just that every word they said landed differently. Maybe because I now knew something they didn't. Or maybe because for the first time, I was looking at my family without the naive filter I used to have. The next morning, after Adrian left for work, my mom called. She wanted to meet, to have a serious talk. I went. And the moment I sat down, she went straight to it. Taryn, you need to be realistic. A man without ambition can't walk a long path with you. I stayed quiet. She continued. He's too gentle. And too ordinary. The word ordinary hit the table like another cut into the little respect Adrian ever received in this house. Before I could react, my sister walked in. She crossed her arms, leaned against the doorway, and said with that smug tone she always used, "Let's be honest, if it weren't for you, he'd never even be sitting at this table." I looked at her. Not angry, just tired. Tired because their contempt had started to sound almost ridiculous, painfully so. Now that I knew Adrian could buy the house they were sitting in without signing a single extra document. But I didn't say it. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't know what to believe first. The truth locked in Adrian's safe, or the fact that he'd hidden it from me for years. The days after that were a long stretch of small injustices, like everyone in my family was trying to prove Adrian didn't deserve me. During lunch at my mom's house, my sister asked Adrian about his career plans, her tone sharp like she was interrogating him. How long do you plan to stay in that analyst position? Not thinking about moving up? Adrian just answered quietly, I'm fine where I am. The answer made her almost laugh. A man without a big goal will have a hard time holding a place in this family. I looked at Adrian. He just nodded, no reaction at all. That calm of his, sometimes it confused me, and it hurt. I was stuck between both sides. My family criticized him openly. He stayed silent, as if none of it was worth caring about. But now that I knew he owned that massive block of shares, his silence wasn't patience anymore. It was deliberate distance. A calculated kind of staying out. After that, I started noticing things I used to overlook. One time, Adrian was in the shower when his phone rang. The caller introduced himself as Mr. L. His voice was unusually formal as he asked about the previous transfer and said he needed Adrian to confirm another document. I picked up and told him Adrian was busy. The man on the line replied politely, "That's fine. Tell him to message me when he's free. I don't want to disturb a busy shareholder." Shareholder. I froze for a full 3 seconds. I set the phone down just as Adrian stepped out. He glanced at me for a moment, then asked, "Who was it?" He said, "Something about a transfer." Adrian just replied, "Yeah, work stuff." His voice was so calm it felt unreal. I wanted to ask, but I swallowed it. Maybe because I still wasn't ready to touch the thing he was hiding. Another thing happened the following week. My dad's company hosted a meeting with major partners. I went with my mom. Adrian arrived a few minutes after me. The moment he walked in, one of the partners, a man who always acted powerful around my family, walked straight over and offered Adrian a handshake with a level of respect I had never seen him give anyone in my family. "Good to see you again. You helped a lot last time." Adrian gave a small smile and replied, "My pleasure." Nothing more, nothing less. I stood there watching, and my heart skipped a beat. Why would a top-tier partner speak to someone my family always called beneath us with that kind of respect? Why did Adrian know him in a way I'd never heard about? That night, when we got home, I opened my laptop to look for some work files and saw an unread email pop up. It wasn't sent to me. It was sent to Adrian, but it showed up because we were on the same Wi-Fi network. "We're still holding the board seat for you if you change your mind." I read it twice to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Board seat. A seat on the board of directors. People don't send that kind of message to a regular financial analyst. I leaned back in my chair, my chest getting heavier. That was the moment I finally let myself admit it. My husband wasn't the man I thought I married. And the worst part was, I didn't know if that truth hurt me or made me respect him more. When I asked Adrian about the email, he didn't look surprised. He didn't deny it. He just looked at me with eyes that were calm and steady, but not distant. Taryn, I have my reasons. What reasons? When it's time, I'll tell you. That answer stopped me cold. Not because it was vague, but because it reminded me that I wasn't the only person he trusted. That night, I went into Adrian's office to find the documents I needed. I wasn't trying to dig, but in his desk drawer, I found an envelope from the bank, not sealed, addressed directly to him. I opened it on instinct, and in that moment, everything I'd been suspecting was confirmed. It was proof of a stock purchase. A massive one. Bought 5 years ago. I did the math. That year, my family's company had almost frozen because we were short on capital. My family kept it quiet. Only the top internal members knew. It was never made public. Yet Adrian, the man my mom called ordinary, had bought in at exactly that time. I stood there for a long time, holding a sheet of paper that felt light but carried the weight of a boulder. Not because of the money, but because the most unsettling part was the perfect timing between when my family needed capital and when Adrian quietly stepped into the game. That was when I understood. My husband wasn't someone my family could look down on. He was someone they'd never truly seen. And it was also when I started to realize I had no idea how deep this truth actually went. I couldn't sleep that night. Not because of the $8 billion, but because of the bigger question. Who was Adrian, and which version of him had I lived with all these years? The next morning, I went to the only person I trusted to give me real answers. Evan, my best friend from college, now an investment lawyer. I sent him photos of the stock documents. He told me to come in right away. When I placed the file on his desk, Evan stared at it for a few seconds before looking up, his expression unreadable. Taryn, are you sure you want to know everything? I nodded. He opened his laptop, typed quickly, and cross-checked the data from the investment funds listed in Adrian's documents. 5 minutes later, Evan leaned back in his chair. Taryn, Adrian didn't just buy shares. He's a strategic shareholder, and he used anonymous funds to accumulate shares in stages over several years. I felt my hands turn cold. Strategic? Anonymous? Evan turned his screen toward me. All these funds have one thing in common. Their capital ultimately traces back to an investment entity Adrian controls. This might be why he stayed out of everything at your family's company. The fewer people who know, the safer it is. I sat there, frozen. Then Evan dropped the line that wiped everything out of my head. The total shares Adrian holds, based on what I just checked, it's more than 8 billion. More than your brother. More than your mom combined. The air in the room thickened until breathing felt heavy. Adrian, the man my family said had no future, was holding the most important part of their future in his hands. I couldn't tell whether I was more shocked by how wealthy he actually was, or by the fact that he hid all of it so perfectly. Evan looked at me, his voice low. Not everyone wants their power out in the open, Taryn. Especially when they know the other family is practical. I closed my eyes. He was right. My family lived on calculations. People who were useful were respected. People who weren't were pushed aside. And Adrian, maybe he understood that long before I did. I went home with my mind in knots. Every step felt like it pressed down on one long question. If Adrian did all of this to avoid being pulled into a power fight, then what else was he trying to stay away from? That night, I didn't ask him anything. I watched him. And the more I looked, the more I realized the gap between the Adrian I loved and the real Adrian wasn't a straight line. It was two different worlds. But the deepest hurt in me didn't come from the money. It came from one quiet thought. He didn't trust me enough to share the truth. He trusted me when it came to loving him. But he didn't trust me when it came to a truth that could change both our lives. That feeling, it was like being looked down on without anyone saying it out loud. Meanwhile, my family still treated Adrian like someone beneath them. One afternoon, I went to my parents' house because my sister asked me to sign some documents. I overheard a conversation between her and a man I didn't recognize. I stood outside the meeting room door, not trying to eavesdrop, but her first sentence froze me in place. I already sent you everything. Just make Adrian look stupid in front of the partners. If he embarrasses himself in front of my dad, this family will never be able to accept him. It took me a few seconds just to breathe again. My sister had set Adrian up in a deal? Just to make him look like a fool? Just to keep order in the family? The shock hit so hard I had to grip the doorknob to keep from collapsing. Adrian wasn't just being disrespected. He was being sabotaged. By the sister I once thought was just straightforward. I left immediately. I wanted to call Adrian, tell him what I heard. But part of me wanted to piece the rest together on my own before facing him. I got back just as my family was welcoming a major partner to the company. Adrian had been invited out of courtesy, even though I knew no one really wanted him there. When I walked in, the scene in front of me made me stop cold. My mom was talking to that partner, pointing toward Adrian, her voice soft but sharp like a needle. She really is a burden. But Taryn cares about him too much, so our family has no choice but to put up with it. My ears burned as I listened. The partner nodded, the kind of nod people use when they're trying to look neutral. Adrian stood a few steps away. His back was straight, his shoulders didn't tense, his face showed nothing. But his eyes, that was what hurt the most. No anger, no pain, just acceptance. A kind of acceptance that made my throat tighten like something was squeezing it shut. I stared at him for a long time, long enough that every sound around me faded. This was the man who had spent billions saving my family's company. The man who quietly carried something none of them even knew existed. The man my mother had just called a burden. And he stood there, taking the humiliation silently like he'd grown used to it. I walked closer. Adrian turned to me. His eyes were calm in a way that made me want to get angry on his behalf. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. And in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. This would be the last time. The last time my family treated Adrian like he was nothing. The last time I stood still while they stepped on his dignity. The last time I let the truth get buried under their contempt. If I didn't do something, I'd be no different from them. That night, after leaving the event and seeing Adrian quietly take the humiliation, I knew I'd reached my limit. Not the limit of my emotions, the limit of my silence. I went home alone, sat in Adrian's office, and laid everything I gathered on the desk. Documents, emails, screenshots, numbers, deals, anonymous investment funds. Everything spread out like a map of the power he'd been building for years. For the first time in many nights, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt clear. Clear enough to scare myself. Each file, each bank document, each strange phone call, when placed next to each other, lit up like the outlines of a much bigger picture. Adrian wasn't just a shareholder. He was the one who built the financial shield that kept my family's company from collapsing right when it was about to fall. I ran my hand along the edge of the documents, the paper cold but firm. I remembered Adrian's eyes tonight, so calm it hurt. How long had he been enduring that humiliation? And how long had I stood by and let it happen? I couldn't change what had already happened, but I could end it. When my dad called and told us to attend a meeting the next morning with the partners to finalize a major deal, I knew that was the moment. The next morning, the big conference room was bright and full. My dad, my mom, my sister, the executive board, and a line of partners filled the table. Adrian sat at the far end, the same spot they always pushed him into, the spot of someone unimportant. I walked in carrying the neatly clipped folder of documents. My dad glanced at me. "Taryn, you're right on time. We need focus today. This deal is important, so don't let emotions get in the way." I didn't answer. I just sat down next to Adrian. He looked at me for a second, his eyes asking a silent question, but I placed my hand on the table, letting him know, "Let me handle this." The meeting started. My dad talked about strategy, about the share distribution plan, about how our family would maintain control. As I listened, every word he said felt fragile. When a partner asked about internal unity and transparency in share ownership, my dad hesitated. I knew why, because the actual ownership was no longer in his hands. I placed the folder in front of me. "I have a document I need to present before this deal is signed." The whole room turned toward me. My dad frowned. "Taryn, this isn't the time." "It is." I cut him off, my voice colder than I meant it to be. I opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward the partners. This is the full share transaction history of the funds directly tied to our company over the last 5 years. One of the partners raised a brow. "This wasn't in the reports we received." I nodded. "That's because these funds weren't public. They were accumulated by a strategic shareholder, someone all of us overlooked." I stood up, eyes on my family. "That person is Adrian." The words hit the table like an explosion. My mom's eyes widened. My sister shot up from her seat. My dad froze for a few seconds before forcing out a shaky line. "Taryn, what are you talking about?" I didn't look at him. I looked at the partners. He's currently the largest shareholder in this corporation. The amount he holds is more than my brother and my mother combined. I turned a page toward them, and if he hadn't injected capital through those anonymous funds 5 years ago, this company would have collapsed. No one could say a word. The air thickened, pressing down on everyone. I turned to my sister. And this is a copy of your conversation with an outsider, the one you hired to sabotage Adrian in last month's deal. I slid my phone onto the table. The message is already open. I think the partners deserve to know how my family has treated their largest shareholder. The partners looked at my sister with eyes sharp as blades. One of them spoke quietly. We can't move forward if there's internal manipulation like this. My sister's face drained of color. My mom twisted her hands together. My dad bowed his head, unable to get a single word out. The conference room, where my family always stood above everyone else, had suddenly become the place where they were exposed completely. And I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt justice. I turned back to Adrian. He was still sitting there, still calm. But this time, something in his eyes softened when he looked at me. I stood beside him and said clearly, no shaking, no avoiding. Starting today, you're not someone they get to walk over. The whole room went silent, like someone had locked the air in place. I let that sentence sink into every person in my family, cold and honest like a blade. Adrian watched me for a long moment, as if he was reading everything I felt. Then he stood up. He didn't look at my dad. He didn't look at my mom or my sister. He looked only at the partners and spoke in a calm voice with enough weight for everyone to hear. I never needed this family's approval. One sentence. Cold, clean, sharp. He picked up his coat and touched my back lightly, a quiet signal, let's go. Then he walked out of the conference room. I followed him, the silence behind us heavy enough to crush stone. Bookmark back, no one called after me. No one dared. My dad lost control of the deal that very morning. My sister was told by the partners that an internal investigation would be opened. My mom stared into nothing, as if she couldn't process what had just happened. And my family, people who had always lived on confidence and power, suddenly looked like they were standing on ground that wasn't solid anymore. The door closed behind me and Adrian. I didn't look back. After that meeting, everything in my family cracked faster than I expected. News spread inside the company within hours. There was no official announcement, but everyone knew something big had happened. My dad was asked by the board to step back from executive duties while they reviewed his share management and recent decisions. He didn't speak to anyone in the house for 2 days. His office stayed shut, the light inside glowing all night like a ghost that refused to leave. My sister was removed from the biggest project of the year. The partners demanded someone more reliable, though I knew that was just polite wording. They didn't want to get involved in the chaos she had created. The whole house split into 3 clear parts. My dad locking himself in silence. My sister trying to prove she was innocent, though no one cared. My mom pacing around the house, her face heavy like she was carrying a long, cold winter inside her. Everyone in the family spoke very little, but that little bit hurt more than any argument ever could. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I belonged in that house anymore. Not because they were wrong about Adrian, but because I realized something that scared me. If I stayed, I'd eventually become part of the values that made them treat him that way. On Tuesday night, I packed my things. Only what truly belonged to me. I didn't bring anything that tied me to the house. I didn't bring guilt with me either. Adrian stood in the doorway, leaning against the wall, watching me fold each item into my suitcase. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't use any of the power he held to make me stay. When I closed the last suitcase, he finally walked over and placed a hand on the handle. "Taryn," he said, softer than I'd ever heard him speak, "are you sure?" I looked at him. The man who had endured every insult in that house, yet still held a calmness that demanded respect. The man who stayed silent not because he was weak, but because he knew his worth never depended on their approval. I nodded. "I choose respect," I said slowly, every word clear. "Not blood." Adrian didn't say anything else. He just took my hand, warm and steady enough that every decision I just made suddenly felt less frightening. We walked downstairs together. No one in the house asked where I was going. No one stopped me. They just watched, each for their own reason. When the front door opened, a cold draft swept through the hallway. I stepped out and stood beside Adrian. Just the two of us, outside a house that was big, but full of cracks no one wanted to see. On the steps, I turned back one last time, not because I regretted anything, just to mark the moment. I was done waiting for my family to change so I could feel whole. I changed so I could leave the place that kept making me smaller. Adrian opened the car door for me. His movements were calm, but in his eyes there was something softer, like a kind of relief neither of us needed to put into words. As the car pulled away, the house behind us grew smaller. I felt a strange sense of peace, not because I had left, but because for the first time, I chose to stand with the person who had been standing with me all along, even without saying it. I leaned my head back against the seat and watched Adrian drive. He said nothing, but his silence wasn't a wall anymore. It felt like a place I could rest after too much noise. And when I thought about everything that had happened, the insults, the buried truth, the reversals, the collapse of my family, I realized my life had just turned a page quietly, in a way that couldn't be undone. This wasn't a new chapter because Adrian was wealthy. It wasn't because he was the largest shareholder. It wasn't because I wanted to side with power. It was because I finally understood what I was protecting, and what I was walking away from. I didn't stand up for Adrian because he's rich, I whispered to myself. I did it because I finally opened my eyes. Every journey reaches a point where you have to choose. Keep taking the hurt, or step out and keep your pride. Taryn's story isn't just about betrayal or power. It's about realizing who truly stands with you, even when they never say it out loud. A relationship only lasts when both people are seen for their real worth. And sometimes, growing up means walking away from the people who seemed closest, so you can stand beside the one who treats you with real respect. And you, if you had to choose between a toxic family and someone who always stands on your side, what would you choose? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy stories that hit deep and stay sharp, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next episodes. Thank you for spending your time with today's story. I'll see you in the next one.